Hey everybody, in this tutorial we're going to be talking about how you can control your particle appearance using different texture settings. So we have a lot of stuff to get through, so I'm going to just start off right off the bat here by going into our PopcornFX learning samples. We're going to use an example in the emitter settings here called this distribution cuboid. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and just double click that and press the W key because it kind of appears a little bit below our ground here. And there's our dummy. Let's just press Shift S right off the bat to sample it. Or to simulate it rather, and you can see here that we have this cuboid right here. If we go to look at it from the top, you can see we have a cube volume right here. And the way that's achieved is by going to your particle or PopcornFX tab over here, and you can change your emit volume. Right now it's 200 and 200 on the X and Y axes, and 100 on the Z axis. You can see it's a little bit shorter on the Z axis. So that's how we can define the area of our particle effects, using these emit volumes. However, we can use meshes of any sort of shape to actually use those to distribute the particles in different ways. So I'm going to show you a quick example of that. Let's just Shift S to end that simulation. What I'm going to do first is I'm going to go down here to my particle settings, under particle here in the particle section. And right now we're using this additive one. So we're using this blend mode additive. We're not using a sprayed atlas. And right now it's using a blue circle, okay? So it's a simple blue circle. I'm going to replace that with a white circle just to give us a more neutral color, okay? So I have a white circle already prepared here. And then if I Shift S right now, it's basically get the same thing, only this time we're using white particles. Awesome. Okay, so there we go. Now what we're going to do now is we're going to bring in our own special mesh. Not really that special. I'm just going to go to Create and create a surface and a plane right here. Okay, and I'm going to bring my plane up just like this. You can see it's pretty big, so we're going to scale it down a little bit by going to our attributes here, and we're going to just maybe change it to about a 5 on the scale right there, maybe a little bit larger than that. Let's go ahead and put 8. And I'm going to rotate it using the E hotkey, and we're going to bring it like this. Let's bring it up to like -90 degrees here. All right, and bring it a little bit further up, just like that. Okay, so what we can do is we can actually use this mesh. We can distribute all those particles along the surface of this mesh. Now the way we do that is we select our little dummy down here, go to our PopcornFX tab, at the very top, under the emitter section right here, we need to select Mesh Sampler. Okay, so select Mesh Sampler and use your little picker tool and select the mesh you want. So in this case, our plane. All right, so if I press, let's actually make our plane invisible first. Okay, so just select it and use this little visibility tool up there. So let's simulate this, and you can see, whoops, nothing happens at first, and that's because we need to select another little option down here. Okay, so we selected the plane that we want, but we also need to use Mesh Sampler down here. Okay, so when we do that, if we press Shift S, now we're emitting those particles just along this plane, like that. Okay, so that's a really, really simple way, a really simple example, just using a simple plane, how you can emit those particles along that plane. And this example here under emitter settings, the emitter settings folder, this distribution horizontal plane kind of shows you a very similar process. Okay, so that's how you can emit the particles along a certain mesh or along a certain plane or whatever you have. And that's using the mesh sampler. Let's take a look at the next item here in the sampler list in the emitter section, which is color map on mesh. Now you can see the color map on mesh currently is set to white. Okay, now if I wanted to change this to something else, first of all, let's actually go down here as well to our lifetime and our particle settings and make sure all these are white. Okay, so we have them all set to white. Good enough. All right, so if we select color map on mesh, obviously there's nothing here at the moment, so we're basically just emitting the white. Okay, it's not even taking any data from this texture resource. However, we can just double click this and we can use a color map mesh that I've kind of set up here. If I just go ahead and open this, you can see it's just a nice little rainbow, okay? And the rest of the background is all black. So make sure anything that you don't want to show up, just make it sure it's black, okay? And then you can use whatever colors you want and whatever pattern you want throughout the rest of the image. Okay, so we'll just close that down. We'll replace it with this color mesh, this texture resource right here, and let's Shift S to simulate that. Whoops, same thing again. So we need to actually go down here to use color map on mesh. So it's kind of a two-step process. You need to modify it up here and then make sure you use the custom resource down here and then Shift S, and you can see, okay, we have the plane on the side. So what we can do is I can actually just take that plane and make it visible again here, and let's just rotate it on the axis here, just like this. Okay, so let's change it back to 0 on the Y-axis there, and then we should be good to go. make it invisible. If that happens, just change your mesh or change the orientation of your mesh, and you can get this beautiful looking rainbow right here. And if you wanted to have, more particles emitting from that, we can change our emit rate to whatever we want. It's already pretty high, so let's just kind of keep it right there. And what I'm going to do is also down here, you can go to your select additive right here. We're emitting these particles, these white particles. We can actually set exposure bloom, and we can actually kind of pump up the exposure bloom of these beautiful rainbow particles like that. We can get a sparkly rainbow example just like this, okay, by pumping up the exposure bloom. All right, so that's about it for that. Let's just press Shift S to end that simulation. So that's using the color map on mesh option up here. Let's take a look at how to use color map lifetime, okay? So I'm going to select color map lifetime, and what we're going to do is we're going to actually bring in a different emitter in this case. I'm going to just delete the original one we have, and let's go to our content tab. We're going to use a super tool, PopcornFX super tool. We're going to use a texture emitter. So I'm going to just double click and add that to my scene. Bring it up just like this. Okay, so Shift S, the texture emitter, obviously just normally the standard one just emits all these numbers like this. We're not going to bother changing the emission particles or anything like that. But what I'm going to do is we're going to use another mesh. So I'm going to create another surface here, another plane. And let's just bring this one up as well. And make sure you have lock scale XYZ on here. I'm just going to change that to maybe a value of 3, maybe even 2. We can just make it smaller. And I'm going to rotate it this way. All right, so it's going to be facing this direction here. And we'll just move it up here. All right, because we're going to have those particles kind of emitting in this direction towards the blue Z axis right there. Okay, so what we need to do first, again, select our dummy down there, mesh sampler, pick the tool, pick the plane, use mesh sampler, and Shift S, ta-da, we are now emitting these numbers. Okay, like I mentioned, we're going to take a look at using this color map lifetime. Now, traditionally, the way that you modify these, the lifetime of your particles, the lifetime color of your particles, is go to particle settings and down here to lifetime. So they'll start off at dark blue and kind of end off at a light green here as we get to the end. If I Shift S to simulate, you can see it's a very slight fade. Okay, now you can change these colors to whatever you want. You want to change this one to red, for example. There you go. Okay, so you see it red at the end. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that these are all at white at this time. Okay, so I'm going to select white right here. We're going to select white right here and white right here. Okay, so we're not going to use these. Basically, if you set these all to white, it's going to remain default. Okay, so we're going to use this little doodad up here, color map lifetime, this texture resource. Now, this is a bit complex, but actually it's quite simple. Let's take a look at the colors. So on the very left, we have a dark red, which moves to a light yellow. All right, and in the middle, we have a blue that moves to a green. And at the right, we have a kind of a purple that moves to a topaz, okay? So just these are the basic texture resource colors that we have on this map. We can launch this in Photoshop if we want. Just go to launch right here, and you can see the map that we have, okay? Now what's going to happen is if I go back to iClone here, let's use color map lifetime, okay, down here. We already used color map on mesh already, so let's check this one now. And if we Shift S to simulate, what's going to happen is we're going to gradually fade from red to yellow, okay? And that's the red to yellow on the left-hand side here. Now we also have a color map lifetime ratio. Now as we move this ratio slider from left to right, what's going to happen is we're going to move in increments from the left side of our texture resource map to the right side. So if we, for example, change this to 50, it's going to be 50% right in the middle where my mouse cursor is. It's going to end up right here. So we're going to get a blue to green fade. Okay, so if I Shift S to simulate one more time, and I change this to the middle, we're going to start getting a blue to green fade. And then as we move to the other side, we're moving all the way across to the very far right. We got a purple to a nice light green fade or light blue fade right there. Okay, so that's basically the color lifetime ratio, color map lifetime ratio. We can actually change this to whatever we like as well. I'm going to just load in my own custom one here. And this one's kind of easier to see the difference. So on the left, up until about halfway through, 50% of the way through, we have this red, which goes through almost the entire color wheel down to a red again. And on the right, we have a blue, yellow, blue mixture. So let's go ahead and use this as our sample ratio, or as our color map lifetime. So again, we're using the blue, yellow, blue on the far right. If I go to 51, still using it, 50, boom. Suddenly we're swapping over to the colors that were used on the left side of our texture resource map, okay? So it won't change anywhere between 0 and 50. Once you cross that 50 barrier, then we're into the blue, yellow, whatever territory, okay? Just keep that in mind. That's how you can use your own custom color maps to determine the lifetime of your particles. Okay, and the last example I'm going to show you is using these texture maps to determine the emission values. Okay, so I set this back. I have a texture emitter right here, texture emitter on the bottom of my scene here, and we're using blend mode additive, so we're using this diffuse basic white particle right here. Okay, if I shift S to simulate, boom. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to go back and use the mesh sampler again. So I'm going to select mesh sampler. And we're going to pick a target and pick this wall thing over here, okay? Because we're going to have the particles emitting from these little holes eventually, okay? So what I'm going to do first is Shift S to simulate, and of course we need to go to our mesh sampler, okay? 2 steps, and we're emitting from the entire wall. Now what we want to do is we want to focus that emission on these little 2 circles right here, okay? The little 2 pipes, I guess. Okay, so what we can do is we need to launch the UV map for this wall in Photoshop. So let's go over to materials here, and with any channel selected, you can just go over here to launch UV reference. Now in some cases when you load your UV map into Photoshop, the aspect ratio may be off a little bit. So what you want to do is you also want to load in your diffuse map just in case to ensure that there is consistent aspect ratio between your diffuse map and your UV map. And you want to change your UV map dimensions to match that of the diffuse channel. And then let's move over to Photoshop here, and there's our UV map all set up. Now I have a couple of images that have already been preset, and that's because these are target images, and we're going to be focusing on the channels of these target images to determine the properties of our texture emission. So right now we just have this UV map set up. What I'm going to do is I'm going to select my first one here. Actually, we're going to choose this one right here. Let's take our color lifetime off there. This one right here, I'm going to just press Control A, Control C, and go to this one over here and press Control V, and I'm going to go to my layers and just make the opacity a little bit smaller. Okay, so we're going to decrease the opacity, and you can see that we have a much whiter color over here, so focusing around the bottom kind of quarter of the pipe, and this one over here is focusing on the bottom quarter of this smaller pipe there as well. Okay, so we have all the positioning correct. And I've already created these. I'm just kind of showing you where you can load the UV map for reference on where you want the emissions to come from. So obviously we want them to come from these bottom quarters of each individual pipe there. Okay, now I have 4 different maps loaded up here. And we can just close down our UV reference map for now. We no longer need that. Let's press Control D to deselect that one. So the difference between these is if we go to our Channels tab over here, we're using different channels to determine which part of which value we want the texture channel to affect. Okay, so right now I'm just using the red channel. So you can see that the green, blue, and RGB channels the green and blue channels are all white for our target image right here. So what we want to do is we just want to make sure that we have RGB selected, and we make sure that green and blue are completely white. Only the red channel will have this image that you saw before. Okay, so like this right here. Now notice that the right little crescent moon there is a lot whiter, and this one's 50% white. So this one's 50% white gray. This one is completely 100% white. So when we look at the red channel indicates the life of the particle. So how long the particle will last on the screen. Okay, so let's go ahead and activate all those channels again. And this one is called Texture for Emission R. Okay, so we're only using the red channel. So I'm going to go ahead and load that into my map in iClone here. So let's go over to our emitter there and PopcornFX tab and Texture for Emission. And this is where you load in that texture resource. Okay, so it's only Targa available. Okay, so keep that in mind. So let's double click that, and we're only going to be using the Texture for Emission R. Notice this one here is RG. This one is RGB. And we'll talk about those a little bit later. But for the R, we're going to load that in, okay, and Shift S to simulate. Okay, and we need to make sure we have a little bit of more emission going on there. Let's maybe change our emit rate to 10,000 as opposed to 100 there. Okay, so if you recall, the little crescent moon on the bottom here had about 50% gray, 50% white, or 50% black, 50% white, so 50% value. And this one had 100% white. So the length of these two streams, notice that this one is exactly twice as long as this one here, okay? So that's what those values mean when you load in only the red channel of your target image. Okay, let's Shift S to end that simulation. And let's take a look at the next one here. So the next one is the red and green. Okay, so RG standing for red and green. Now, these two values, you can see red, we have the red right here, and the green. And they both have the same, okay, the same white and 50% white, 50% gray. Okay, so let's make sure you have all of them shown right here. And we're going to load that one in. Now the green actually stands for size. So what's going to happen is the particles on the large pipe here are now going to be twice as large as the particles on the left one. Okay, so let's load in that RG and Shift S to simulate. And you can see now we've actually, we also have the longer length right here. So the red is affecting the length, but we also now have the smaller particles on the left. Okay. And they're also reaching, halfway, indicated by the R channel in our RGB. Okay, so let's just Shift S to end that simulation. And let's take a look at the next one. The next one is the blue. Okay, so the blue stands for speed. Okay, so texture emission for RGB. So now you can see we have the exact same images on all the channels. So red, green, and blue. So we have it twice as long on the right pipe. We have the size twice as large on the right pipe. And with the blue, we're going to have the speed twice as fast on the right pipe. Okay, so let's load in that one as well. And there we go. RGB. And all right, so there you go. So now we have the particles on the right moving twice as fast as those on the left. And because they're moving slower, now they're diminishing, or they're disappearing a lot faster than the ones on the right. Okay, so that's how the RGB channels of those target images work. Let's just end that simulation there so it's not running in the background. And we have one final channel that we can look at, and that is the alpha channel. Okay, so let's go up to this tab here, and now we have the alpha channel. Now, if you're using the alpha channel, you have to create your own channel right here, okay? And you want to name it alpha space 1. Now, if you're using the alpha channel, you want to make sure that you're not using the blue, green, and red channels. Okay, this is completely separate from these. And the alpha channel simply stands for brightness. Okay, so if you want your particles to be brighter, then you can obviously have 100% brightness on here on the right side and 50% brightness on the left. So let's go over to our iClone again and load in that alpha RGB A50 right here. All right, and Shift S to simulate that. And you can see the brightness is indeed twice as bright, effectively, on the right-hand side as on the left-hand side. So that's the basics for the target images. Let's just Shift S in that simulation. That's the basic for the target images that you can import into this little texture resource item right here under Texture for Emission. And from that point on, you can tweak a couple of parameters, tweak the color and the texture and the distortion of these two individual particle streams. And you can get an example just like this, where we have this kind of sewage just floating into our stream right here. All right, we'll just go ahead and play that back again. And so yeah, you can combine a bunch of different parameters and attributes to really get your own custom stuff going on here. So that's about all there is to show in this tutorial, guys. Hopefully you learned a lot, and thanks so much for watching. Make sure you check out our forums over at forum.reallusion.com, and I'll see you in the next video.